Hi, folks. It's time for my yearly re-record. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often because my supporters deserve to be thanked, and I want to keep things more up to date going forward. First off, thank you for returning to the Whiskey Ring. If this is your first time here, or if you're a frequent listener, please take the moment to like and subscribe, rate and review wherever you found the podcast. If you have suggestions for how to make the podcast better, or guests or topics you'd like to hear, please reach out to me at david@whiskymyweddingring.com or via Facebook or Instagram. Second, I want to thank my vintage level sponsors, those at the highest level who keep this podcast going. Truly, without these supporters, I would have had to stop doing this a long time ago. Thank you specifically to Don, to John and Jim, Bill and Connor, Steve, Jake and Bill, Trevor, Michael and Jesse, Jared, Brendan and Larry, Logan, Patrick and Andrew, Dustin, Wade and Gavin, Daniel, and Justin. Thank you all for supporting, listening, telling your friends about this podcast. Cannot stress enough how much you all make this possible to go forward. If you haven't yet joined the Patreon, please consider doing so at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. You can support for as little as $5 a month, where you can have access to ad-free episodes, and will also have priority if a vintage spot becomes available. Those spots are strictly limited, so if a spot becomes available, you're going to want to be the first to know. Lastly, going forward, I am trying to be better about posting show notes for each episode on my website, whiskyinmyweddingring.com. These show notes will have links to websites and socials for my guests, and will also have additional information not in the interview, including reviews and tasting notes whenever possible or relevant. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope to have you back as a listener next week. Welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. I'm thrilled today to be going back to a country we've only visited once before with Henrik over at Spirit of Ven. So we're going back over to Sweden. It's one of the Nordic countries with one of the most exciting whiskey scenes, 20-ish distilleries right now making whiskey, and to talk about High Coast Distillery. This was a distillery founded as Box Distillery originally, and is known as High Coast 2018 and after. So to talk about High Coast, we've got Roger Melander. He is now the master distiller. He's been there since 2010 and legend in the Nordic whiskey scene. So Roger, welcome on.
Oh, thank you.
So let's jump right into, even before we get to Box Distillery and what's now High Coast, what was your entry into whiskey?
Long time ago. I started actually as a beer geek, having beer tastings in the 80s. And then I started to try more whiskey, but I had like 10 different bottles on the shelf. So it wasn't until mid-90s that I really had huge focus in whiskey and malt whiskey in particular. And started doing tastings and started a limited company in 2002, educating bar personnel, doing tastings for whiskey clubs and so on. And also had a company doing engineering, mechanical engineering. And after a while, I thought that I should go to Scotland and work with whiskey full time. But at that time, I got an offer to a brand new distillery. It hasn't started yet, as a whiskey maker, doing tastings and marketing and stuff. And I thought I can keep my other company at 75% and do this at 25%. So I visited this new distillery up north in Sweden, and a few days later, the CEO called me and said, "I want you to be distillery manager instead." And I thought that isn't possible in 25% of my time. But I couldn't refuse that offer, because even if you get a good position in the distillery in Scotland, you can't do whatever you like. And at this new site, I could do anything. So, yeah. Beginning of a really, really fun journey in the autumn 2010.
And so, as I mentioned, this is founded in 2007 by a group
the
of
company,
friends,
yes.
Yeah, the company. So I know you weren't there in 2007. You were there in 2010, but what was the genesis of the idea for starting a distillery?
I think it's one of the founders, it was actually an artist who was looking for a place for the art. There's a studio and a gallery. And in the 90s, he found this old power station with a 30-meter high chimney and so on. So he bought that from the community for about $300. and started renovating, putting windows and doors, and he replaced about 500 brick stones in the chimney. And 2 years later, it was raining through the roof, and he asked his brother, what should you do with this building? And the brother said, let's make whiskey. They had no knowledge at all about whiskey, so it's a long journey. And finally, when they had finance enough to order equipment in the spring of 2010, they placed an order in Scotland for the pot stills, and they bought some stainless steel equipment from a Swedish company. And when I first visited in October 2010, it was still a construction site. But I saw the potential, and it was a really fun project.
This wasn't it wasn't the first distillery in Sweden. I think that went to Mackmyra at the time.
Yeah, in modern time, it was Mackmyra. They started really small in 1999 in December. Every distillation was about 30 liters new make. So
very small, very small.
Very small.
So, but when you guys started, even in 2010, there wouldn't have been many others even distilling at that point, right?
No, besides Mackmyra, Smögen on the west coast is a very small distillery. They started the same year, but I believe it was like August 2010 or something. And Henrik, who you talked to, in Spirit of Ven, started earlier as well. But he started mostly making other spirits like akvavit, gin, and so on. Had a small production of whiskey as well.
So when you were coming over, as you said, you had the mechanical engineering background. You had the background of being industry adjacent with the tastings. But I read you also had some practice at Bruichladdich, Springbank, and Ben Romach.
Yeah.
And yeah. I was curious how you what practice meant for you and how you got into those roles.
Well, it's practice, small practice. The first one at Bruichladdich was actually the Bruichladdich Academy. So 1 week education, and then I stayed a few more days. And in Springbank, it was maybe 4 days, 3-4 days or something. And I got a scholarship to go to Gordon MacPhail and Ben Romach. So it's just a few days. But I had done tons of traveling around distilleries, mostly in Scotland, of course.
And as part of that experience, I mean, you have spoken very highly of people like Ichiro Okuto at Chichibu, Alfred Barnard, I know not a contemporary, but as an inspiration, Alfred Barnard, Michael Jackson, Per Ellsberger, and of course Jim McEwen at Bruichladdich. Putting aside Barnard, have you, and I know you've gotten to meet Jim, of course, being at Bruichladdich and over the years, had you gotten to interact with these people before you got to Box and High Coast?
Well, I mentioned Ichiro. I met him a few times in Sweden and in different fairs in the UK, London, and so on. And I also visited him at the distillery in Japan. I haven't seen the new site. I've seen the old distillery. Well, you could call it old, the smaller one. And I really, really fancy his work and his thoughts on whiskey making. It was like a new Masataka Tatsuru in modern days. And I also loved the flavor of his new make spirit. It was very similar to ours. So that's kind of hero. I like him. Well, I like the whole team of Chichibu, of course. When you mentioned Barnard, I met him, of course. Jim McEwen I met several times in Scotland, of course. Ellsberger started as an author. He wrote a really, really good book of whiskey, unfortunately only in Swedish. It came out the second edition a couple of years later. That was loads of whiskey knowledge. It's one of the best books I ever read at that time. And I met him on a couple of tastings, of course, in Sweden.
And I forget what year.
Anyone else?
I was just saying Michael Jackson. I forget what year he passed. It was early. It was maybe 2007.
Yeah, so. It's many years ago.
Yeah,
he was like a god for whiskey geeks, also beer geeks. It was really, really good, both beer and whiskey. But I never met him.
He was I mean, he passed before I could legally drink, so I unfortunately didn't learn about him until after he had passed. And so to complete the background story at the moment, I did want to just address, I'm probably going to call High Coast going forward just to avoid confusion, but it was founded as Box Distillery. The name change happened about 2018. I know the story, but can you explain for listeners why the name was changed to High Coast?
Let's start the history of the name of Box first, maybe. The distillery is located in an old power station. It was a wood-fired power station in operation between 1912 and 1924. And that was for making electricity for the timber sorting place. It was the biggest in the world, like 500 meters from this building. And it was named after an old sawmill in around 1850s, and changed name from Kungsgårdens Ångsågverk in Swedish to Box Company, Limited Company, because they made wooden parts for export to England. And in Swedish it's called låda, and in English it's called box, so they changed the name to Box. And that was burnt down in 1895. And when they built the new power station, they kept the name Box because the place, the site was called Box. So it was the gallery that they started. It was called Box Power Station as well. And when we started making whiskey, we kept the name Box. So Box Whiskey and Box Distillery. And we owned the brand Box in Europe. But when they were starting writing about us in US, there were lawyers connected to Compass Box who thought it was a bad thing to have two whiskey companies with a box in the name. I tried to say there's at least 4 distilleries in the US with a box in the name as make whiskey, and threatened with other things. So they were partly owned by a small spirit company called Bacardi. They had a bit more muscles than we had, so we didn't take the fight. And at that time, we had the brand was called Box, the High Coast Distillery. Box High Coast whiskey. So we just removed Box and kept High Coast. And that was in 2018.
Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking about this as I'm doing the research that, like you said, so many distilleries in the US, they have Box, or, I mean, how many have Farm in the name or something like that? But I don't know. I get why it was done. And I mean, it's clearly made it hasn't affected your business and your ability to get recognition, which has been great. So jumping back to Sweden as a whole, as I said, we spoke to Henrik, but it was a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 or even 4 years ago. And so last thing before we jump into really High Coast specifically is, can you give us kind of an overview of what drinking culture looks like in Sweden and what distilling looks like in Sweden?
Yeah, I guess people outside Sweden have different views, but we drink, of course, and it's a lot of beer, some wine, and some spirit. But if you compare to the amount of like cheaper blended whiskey and expensive malt whiskey, I guess the world average is about 7% malt whiskey, and in Sweden it's, I guess, almost 25% of the whiskey we buy is malt whiskey. Taiwan is maybe 50%, but people have been drinking quality compared to volume. But younger people, when I was young, we were partying Friday and Saturday. The rest of the days was nothing, maybe. Today it's more spread out the whole week. People don't get drunk on Fridays and Saturdays like they used to be. And unfortunately, young people today don't drink that much at all. So the amount of alcohol being consumed by Swedes today is lower than it used to be. But I guess they're drinking more of the good stuff than cheap vodka and stuff.
Sweden also has, similar to other Nordic states, you've got a monopoly. So this used to be an absolute monopoly, only state-run stores. You guys couldn't even do distillery exclusives, and I know it's still complicated to do one, but you couldn't do them in a period. I think a couple of years ago, and you would know better than I, but a couple of years ago, the monopoly opened a little bit in that people could buy a bottle from the producer, but there were some interesting caveats to it.
Yeah, you could, as a producer of alcohol, you could sell like one bottle of whiskey, I guess 70 centiliters of whiskey. But you need to do like a guided tour first for maybe 40 minutes or something, you need to give them information about the horrible things that alcohol can do to your body, both speak to them and give them some paper about it. And if you produce more than 70 or 75,000 liters of pure alcohol a year, you're not allowed to sell whiskey on the site. So we were about 8 producers in Sweden that was too big to have this opportunity to sell some whiskey for our visitors.
And you're able to do tastings on
Yeah,
site.
oh yes.
Is there a limit there in terms of either the volume that you can give for tasting or?
No. It's well, the first year we had a special license, we call it, for a whiskey producer or alcohol producer. So we had a limit of 115 mils per glass, but I can serve them like 1,000 glasses as long as it was not more than 50 mil in each glass. But if you pour them one glass of 20 mil, it would be too much. But then when we opened the restaurant and visitor center, we had another license similar to any restaurant in Sweden. So we have about 25,000 visitors every year, mostly during the summertime. So now this 2 guided tours of one tasting every day, 7 days a week.
That was going to be one of my questions too. I mean, you're one of the northernmost distilleries in the world, sitting on the 63rd parallel. I think I didn't search a ton. I think there are only three that are further north than you are. You've got Aurora up in Norway, Eimverk, who you've spoken to over in Iceland at 64, and there was one other, I think also in Norway that was at maybe 67 or so. Yes. So not many. So you're way up there, 500 kilometers north of Stockholm. And one of the questions I had was, is there a lot of tourism and foot traffic? Because I would imagine even with the monopoly in place, it's still one of the best ways to get liquid to lips and get your name out there. So
yeah, I mean, we are in a place called the High Coast, Höga Kusten in Swedish, and we had a lot of visitors, hikers and so on. And the distillery is located very beautiful at the river. So even if you don't like whiskey, you can just visit for a nice view.
And can you pronounce the name of the river for me? Because I did not want to insult you by trying.
In Swedish, Ångermanälven.
Ångermanälven.
Ångermanälven. Yeah.
And it does look beautiful. I saw a couple of pictures where it was frozen over during the winter and just had the white scape around the distillery. It looked gorgeous. Building on the experience that you had in whiskey through reading, through tasting, through any experience you had, and also being a native Swede, did you have any hesitation about distilling so far north?
No, not at all. We have a lot of privilege with the location here. First thing, we have beautiful processed water. It's ultra soft. It's actually a bit too clean to be perfect for whiskey, but if it would be a brewery, it would be absolutely perfect because you can add salt and stuff. If you make different types of beer, we don't add anything during the whole process. But really nice water, and also for maturation in our warehouses, we have about 60 degrees Celsius difference between a cold winter day and a warm summer day. So we had lots of things going on in the oak, in the warehouses. And we have in the river huge amount of really good cooling water for distillation. And that could be a problem even in Scotland, that especially during summer, July, August, could be a lack of water, and the water they get isn't cool enough. So when a distillery in Scotland maybe have like 20 degrees Celsius of the new mec in the spirit safe, we are about 2 degrees. So
yeah, I think I want to say it was Tormore that I was talking to, where they were saying that they, in the summer months, they're one of the few distilleries in the region in Speyside that do not run out of water because they have their own dedicated well, I think. But others have to shut down production because there's not enough water, cooling water, particularly coming off the Spey. So for you coming into what was then Box in 2010, you said you were given kind of free reign to Did you and the founders have a significantly different vision for the kind of whiskey you wanted to produce?
I have actually no idea what the founders had in mind. I just did my own thing. At that moment, I was really fond of whiskey, of course, but Japanese whiskey. And I tried a lot of different types of Japanese whiskey, but I'd never tried Japanese new make spirit. So I had to guess how should the new make be, so that many years later in the cask, the whiskey should taste like this. So I was aiming for a clean, fruity, malty flavor. And many years later, I visited most of the distillers in Japan and was quite disappointed until I came to Chichibu, because the unpeated Chichibu was very similar to Boxer High Coast new make. But to make, we also do peated recipes, and our normal peated recipe is 40-45 ppm of kernels in the malt, and you can't really make a peated whiskey without looking at the Scottish West Coast and Isles. So we're not aiming for copying the style, but it's more similar to the West Coast of Scotland.
We'll get into this a bit too, but you have different production methods for each of those spirits as well. Jumping into the production, I love this on your website and on the product details. There is so much information. And for a whiskey nerd like myself, I love knowing all the casks that went in, the yeast, the barley varieties. So coming in with that, one of the things that stood out to me was the yeast seems to be pretty consistent. It's usually the fermentus one, I believe. But the barley, so the malt is usually Pilsner malt, but the barley type can be kind of all over the place. There's many different strains that have been used over the years. And I'll say, just side note, over the years, I've found a couple of bottles on auction, because I honestly find auction is some of the best places to discover whiskeys that I haven't had before. We've got 2 of the 4 early days collections, the Messenger and the Challenger, the Second Step collection, 1 and 02, and then a private bottling from 2022. So I enjoy that because it gave me a good sense of like what you were doing at the beginning and then what's happened over time. So jumping back to the production question, with the barley and the malt that you're getting from Sweden, do you look for a particular strain of barley, or it's more about the malting?
Normally we get in every shipment from Viking Malt is 2 or 3 different strains of barley. But the most important thing is the temperature in the kiln. Pilsner malt is mainly for beer brewers, and you have a base malt, could be Pilsner malt or Pale Ale malt. Pale Ale malt is dried a bit higher than Pilsner malt. And normally, if you see the big distillers in UK and Scotland, they have a distiller's malt. It's a different strain, of course, but the maximum temperature in the kiln is a few degrees lower. We tried all of those, but I believe that for us, the Pilsner malt is best. We don't get that high yield that we could if we're using distiller's malt, but its yield isn't as important as flavors. So, and we also did some organic malt when we replaced the old boiler that was oil-fired with a new one with wood pellets. In 2018, we started also to make organic spirits. And the goal was to have about 20% at least of our production to be fully organic. Today, it's a bit difficult to get hold on organic malt. So we are not up to 20%.
And the expansion over the years, we alluded to this earlier, you're over that, I think, 75,000 liters of pure alcohol a year where you could sell at the distillery, but you've gotten up to, as far as I can tell, maybe 350,000. That sound about right? 350,000 liters per year?
In volume, yeah. Well, the capacity is about 300,000 liters pure alcohol. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we have, in average, 285,000 maybe.
It's still a solid chunk of capacity.
Yeah. Sorry?
I was going to say, sorry, that's still a solid near at capacity.
Yeah. Yes, we did 14 batches a week, 2 batches a day, 7 days a week. And that was maximum what you could do. But the market has been a bit different. And so in mid-December last year, we reduced from 14 to 10 batches a week, and in April we reduced it more. So currently we're having about 70,000 liters annual production. Might be so for a year or two. Let's see.
And the mashing and fermentation regimen that you have between the yeast, the barley types, the Pilsner malt, was this, you said this was something you were able to play with a little bit and experiment to see what worked for you. How much did your previous beer knowledge help you inform what choices to make there?
It helps. I'm a home brewer as well, and I've tried making wine and a lot of other things. Well, the method that we use for mashing is more like Japanese style. We're looking for clear wort that gives a bit more fruity flavors in the wash. There are a few other distillers in Scotland that do similar mashing. That's one thing. So we recycle the first maybe 500 liters on top of the mashing bed until we get a clear wort, and then we start cooling it down to the washbacks. Another thing is the third water that you use normally could be like 90, 95 degrees Celsius. But if you get too high, you extract some harsh tannins from the husk in the barley. So we are not allowed to go above 80 degrees. So we're keeping as low temperature as possible for the third water during mashing. So all the tannins you find in the whiskey should come from the oak or cask, not from the barley. So our goals has always been that the new mix spirit should be good to drink before we put it in the cask.
I was surprised when you said, I heard you say this in an interview before, but I was surprised when you said that the Japanese new make you tried when you went to Japan was unimpressive. It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it wasn't bad, but wasn't as good as I was hoping for until I came to Chichibu.
Yeah, was it just? I'm curious in terms of how it compared to Chichibu and to your unpeated distillate. Was it just that it wasn't as fruity or as light or flavorful, or was there something else?
Well, it had the fruitiness, of course, but it was, in Sweden we call it a bit dirty. It wasn't that clean in the malty profile. I've seen the same pattern in distilleries in Scotland. The distillers has been on steam for 200 years, haven't the cleanest new mix spirit. But a lot of the new ones, like Knocknean and so, have a really clean, beautiful new make. So it could be the similar in Japan. There's a lot of new distillers in Japan today. I've just visited a few of them. But most certainly they have a better new make today than the big ones that's been on steam for a long time.
With the clear wort, it's been a while since we've spoken to a distiller using a clear wort to go in. You're letting it happen, for lack of a better term, naturally, just through settling rather than lautering. Was that more of a stylistic choice, or was it simply that a lauter usually costs a lot of money to put in?
Actually, not sure why I did it. The thing is, I like some of the ways that it's been for many years. I don't use any additives. No additives at all, except for malt water and yeast. So we don't have any caramel in the blending. I don't use any anti-foam in the pot stills or in the mash tun washback. Sorry. So honest, clean, and transparent. That's my philosophy.
And then moving over to the stills, you've described them as almost identical to Kilchoman stills, but a little bit larger.
Yeah.
You said when you came in, it was still a construction site, but things were being moved in. Did you have any input as to the stills that were chosen?
No, my first distillery, I first visited at the distillery, the pot stills has already arrived. So the first two ones. And the reason why they is similar to Kilchoman is the founders, some of the founders went to Scotland and visited Kilchoman. It was rather new distillery at the time. And they thought that the capacity and size of the distillery should be similar to Kilchoman. And they used the same designer who made the stills at Kilchoman. So the shape is very similar. The size is slightly larger than Kilchoman.
Speaks to how how far we've come. Kilhoman started in 2005, so they really would have been there at the earliest stages as well, and before Forsyth's got slammed with new orders for pot stills as well. When you started distilling, I mean, you've said you also like peated whiskeys in particular. I think Sweden and the north are known for liking smokier peater whiskeys at a higher rate, let's say, than Middle or Southern Europe.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you started, I've heard you say it was about 50-50 unpeated and peated spirit coming off the stills. But as of maybe, a couple of years ago, it was closer to like 80% unpeated. What does the balance for you look like today?
The thing is, I like peated whiskey, of course, as well. Actually, if I had to choose one style, I would take the unpeated. But to have some peated whiskey to work with when you're making a new blend, new recipe, it's marvelous. But to get some peaty, smoky flavors in whiskey, you don't need to have 50%. You can add like 20-25%, and you get enough of the peaty notes as a top spice in the whiskey. So we're selling a lot of private cask as well, 12,000 far. And the first year, about half of them choose a peated recipe for their private casks. Today, it's not could be like 35% maybe choose a peated recipe. So we're still making like 20% peated. And we had done quite a different peat level of the mold. We started at like 31 ppm, and then when we started buying it also from UK, it was 40-45 ppm of phenols. So that was our normal peated recipe. And then I did a fun project with 63 ppm, and we also have done heavily peated, like over 100. So 128, 105, and the last one was 225 ppm, and that was peaty. You could feel the smoke outside the distillery. So
yeah, it's like your own version of Octomore at that point.
Yeah, well, yeah, Octomore, the first batch was 80.5 ppm, I believe, and then when they went crazy, so. We have no ambition at all to making the peatiest whiskey in the world. It's just fun to have something really peaty to work with.
I mean, you mentioned it, so I think it's a good time to mention this as a fun project that you got to do. And you talked about this way back in 2016, so 10 years ago, with Mark Gillespie over at Whiskey Cast, the 63 project. It was 63 ppm, 63 degrees latitude, resized bourbon casks at 63 liters, fermented for 63 hours. The price for the malt was 6.3 Swedish krona per kilo. The Cooper was born in 1963. The cask matured 6.3 meters above the floor, bottled to 63%, and you were aiming for a cost of about 63 euros. That's dedication.
Yeah, there was quite a few more preference for 63. The first batch was mature for 63 months. The second one was actually put for the US, but it never arrived to US. It went into Germany instead, I believe. The third batch was 6.3 years, but they still had some whiskey left, so I re-racked that whiskey for PX sherry cask for an additional 630 days. And all batches was reduced to 63% ABV and bottled at a temperature of 63 degrees Fahrenheit, 17.2 degrees Celsius. And I wished I had a whiskey bottle containing 63 centiliters, but that's no standard. But if you take 63 plus 6.3 plus 0.63 plus 0.063 and carry on, you end up exactly 70. That's a standard.
That's this was, that was a project that you had to go really deep on to get all of those metrics to hit the 6.3 or 6.3. Are there other projects like that you've done over the years that stand out as either particularly unique or particularly close to your heart?
Yeah, the 63 project was just for fun. I like having fun, but I've done a lot of experiments, and I usually say every experiment is good. Some are planned. Other experiments is a result that someone fucked up in a way. So we do a lot of experiments with different type of wood and size and filling strength. So maybe the first 5 years I was mostly doing experiments in the distillery for the best new make possible. And last 10, 11 years has been mostly for warehousing and maturation and casks. And we had products called Advanced Masterclass. The idea was you're buying a box with 5 bottles and you read the theory online about this and then try the bottles. It was just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you should put the bottles in correct order with the new knowledge you had. And the first one I did was about heat treatment of oak, and the second one was actually planned to be about phenols, different phenols, but it didn't go as planned. So I had to do physics and chemistry behind the distillation process. So it was different cuts from the peated mill cut or hearts. I had plans of doing 5 different types of sherry. I like sherry, but when I got those casks, both in American and European oak, even the Fino cask had some Oloroso notes in it, so I couldn't do advanced masterclass with those casks. But everyone tasted marvelous. And I thought no one has ever made whiskey with 5 different types of sherry in the same bottle. So we did one called Cinco. That's approximately 5 in Spanish. So it was fun. We did Cinco 1 and then the second batch, and it will be more of those. So we do a lot of experiments and having a lot of fun at the distillery.
This question just kind of popped up, but I know you've reduced your output to match market conditions right now. And usually we see that as a negative because, of course, you're producing less, you got to pull back. But at the same time, does it give you a little more room for now to do experiments like that because you're not running at full speed?
Maybe not, because I'm no longer the distiller manager since a couple of years ago. So I have more time of doing planning and experiments for the future regarding how much they produce. The reason why we reduce the production volume is because we had for many years been the biggest distillery in Sweden. I'm not sure, it would be 20, 25 distilleries making whiskey in Sweden today. And we had for last 4 or 5 years produced more than all the other combined. So even if we go down now, we are still the biggest player in Sweden.
Although now doing, I think you said you're down to about, are you down now to where you could sell a bottle at the distillery?
No, yeah, well, if we continue, but I'm not sure. We have plans of selling whiskey, but since we had large production beginning of this year until April, we have produced more than the 75,000 liters. So maybe next year we can be able to sell a bottle. Our visitors.
You host the High Coast Whiskey Festival, so I think about that as it's an opportunity, of course, to sell if you can. I know. I also think if you are the biggest producer in Sweden, maybe you're not as dependent on in-person sales for that same reason. Like you would have so much whiskey out there and in the stores, in the monopoly stores.
Yeah.
That
the thing is, but selling a bottle for our visitors is not for us. It's for our visitors to have better visit. They can go a guided tour, they can have a tasting, and they can eat dinner, and they buy a bottle before they leave. What we have today and had for many years, that you can always hand fill a bottle of whiskey from a cask in the shop. So we always have a unpeated whiskey and a peated whiskey. And you can hand fill as many as you want, but those bottles will be sent to the monopoly store. So you hand write the label and so on. So it's almost what we're looking for.
It's still an experience. It's one of the best experiences for a whiskey. For a whiskey visitor, whether you're new to it or an aficionado, it's one of the best things. We're going to jump more into maturation as well. I wanted to ask, so over the years, you've done different barreling strengths. So first few months, I think you were doing like 70% entry. Then May 2011 went down to about 63, and then a couple years later reduced to 60% for the most part. The way you put it in one interview was you noticed a huge difference in quality after a few years from filling at a lower strength. What were you seeing from your whiskey that to you indicated, higher quality at, let's say, 63% as opposed to the 70?
Well, high quality, it depends on the size of the cask and the amount of years you plan to have maturation. So, for instance, for a smaller cask, the most of the casks we're selling, the private casks, are about 40 liters. And average maturation time for 40 liter cask should be 4.5 years maybe. And at that time, the best ABV for filling strength should be similar to 54%. But we have done at 56% because when you fill like a sherry cask, the liquid that's in the pore of the oak is maybe just 15%. So you get a drop about 2% in the beginning. So that's why we're filling every cask up to 100 liters at 56%. Larger cask, barrels and hogsheads is 60% because we can have longer maturation and then we get higher quality, in my opinion, at 60%.
So I said there's a huge temperature difference that you get over the years. You said 60 degrees Celsius. I mean, we have listeners around the world, but just for US listeners, so it can go down to, negative 30 Celsius, so about negative 22 Fahrenheit, up to positive 28 Celsius, about 82 Fahrenheit. So, 60 degrees Celsius differential, 100 degree Fahrenheit differential, massive separation there. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting as a comparison was you said that Scotland has an average, they like to say about an average of 2% angel share, but one that's usually inflated a bit from what they get. But it's also, they have a more consistent climate. So they might have 2%, but it'll be 1 to 2% over the full maturation, whereas you guys are getting up to 3-4%, even though you're averaging about the same.
Yeah, it depends on the size of the cask. For a bourbon barrel, I lose 2.55% on average annually. But for a small cask, 40 liters, we are between 4 and 4.5% angel share every year. So smaller cask, you get more contact surface and you lose more. And we lose definitely more during the summertime than the winter time. But we have totally different type of maturation during summer and winter. So we have most of the additive maturation during summertime. We get more color, more extraction from the oak, vanilla, spicy notes. And during the winter, we have huge difference between a couple of days. It could be like 20 degrees difference in just a couple of days during winter time. You don't have that during summer times. The pressure changes inside the cask is enormous. So we get a lot of the interactive maturation that gives us quite different type of fruitiness. So the fruitiness that you have from the new make is more like pears, apples, citrus. But the fruitiness that you get from the interactive maturation during the cold season is more for like tropical fruit, mango, papaya, stuff like that. So I would like to have both of those, and we get them because we have long maturation in 1 year. So
do you get the separation point? I think it's usually about 50 to 55 Fahrenheit of, I apologize, I don't know that in Celsius off the top of my head, but where it splits between wood interaction versus strictly oxidative. How, you said in the warmer months you do get that interaction with the wood from the pressures, but is that limited to, let's say, a couple months out of the year as opposed to a 6 month split?
I would say June, July, August, maybe beginning of September, be end of May as well, where we have the warmer climate. And so often I get the question from private cask owners, when should I bottle my cask? And the question is always, should it get another summer? Because the thing the cask can do for the whiskey during summer is what could make it feel like it's overpowered by the oak. So if you try your whiskey in like March, April, and you think it is perfect, then you should bottle it before the summer. But if you try it in October and I think it's perfect, you can actually wait until April next year. It won't be destroyed. You just add some complexity during the winter time.
That reminds me, you said you don't like to empty barrels below 16 Celsius. Is that part of that same idea of it should be a certain temperature when it comes out of the barrel for maximum balance, let's say?
Well, the thing is, we don't chill filter the whiskey. So even if we don't have those fine filters, we have first a rather coarse stainless steel, like a cloth, that picks up the bigger charcoal bits from the cask. And then it's filtered to stainless steel cartridge. That's a bit finer, but not too fine. But if you have really cold whiskey, well, we take cask down from the warehouse to the bottling hall in midwinter. It could be like minus 20 degrees Celsius. And if you empty whiskey at that temperature, you will lose a lot of flavors. So therefore, we keep them in another room for 3, 4, 5 days to get a room temperature. And then before we empty the cask, just to be sure that we don't remove any flavors we want to have in the bottle.
When it comes to the ex-bourbon barrels that you get, whether they stay full size or whether they're resized, you've said that your favorites tend to be Buffalo Trace and Heaven Hill. But you have others in there as well, Wild Turkey and a couple others. But for you, I always like to ask this of distillers when they have a particular preference. What is it about those casks that either you like or really matches up well with your new make?
The thing is, I said it for others, I probably could find more difference between two barrels from Buffalo Trace that I can find between Buffalo Trace and like Wild Turkey. Bourbon is more like is bourbon, but if you take Buffalo Trace, it could be like 4 years maturation, could be like 15 years maturation, and the mash bill could be different. So the most important part for me is the build quality of the barrel, and especially if it's rinsed or not. A lot of bourbon producers today, they add water into the empty barrels to extract some alcohol from the wood and use that water for diluting the bourbon prior bottling. And it's not that important to empty every liters of water for those barrels because they're going to put in a container and ship them to Europe. So if I get a rinsed barrel and they left some water, when you nose the barrel through the bunghole, it's like putting your nose in old tennis shoes or something. It's bloody awful, and you don't get the flavor that you could have from the previous content as well. So I keep buying from the distillers that I know don't rinse barrels, and I have really high hopes for Heaven Hill that they will never do rinsing. But it's a lot of money left in the oak, so you never know.
Yeah, it could be a couple of like 4 to 5 liters still in the oak, and that's the case.
Yeah, and if you empty like 1,000 barrels a day, it's a lot of whiskey.
It's 1,000 cases that could be otherwise sold. So I get it. Have you, one more question on the barrel preference, because you are a larger distiller and you also were an earlier distiller in Sweden, have you always had the ability to choose what bourbon barrels you got?
Not always. We didn't for many years, but could be like 2-3 years ago, the prices for barrels was sky high. It went from like $100 to $270, and you couldn't choose at all. It was very often a mixed container with different barrels. Today it's back to like $90, $95, and you can handpick whatever you want. So
was that a function of like the shipping problems during COVID, or more demand for the bourbon barrels?
I got some explanation that most of the bourbon distillers bought the bottles from China, and China didn't deliver to the US, and they couldn't empty the barrels without bottles, and therefore I couldn't get the barrels that I pre-ordered. I'm not sure if that's the whole explanation. But there was some shortage, definitely. And a lot of distillers, they bought virgin American oak instead. So normally you can get virgin American oak in a couple of weeks. And at one time it was more than 1 year. You had to wait for virgin American oak. But everything is back to normal today. So
You have said you are no stranger to playing with different woods, different casks. There's one I have to ask you about because I have never seen it before. And that is you have a square cask.
101 actually, square
101.
cask.
Okay. So
yeah, that was quite fun. But we have a really, really good cooper in Sweden. And the fun thing is it started a cooperage in Sweden before there was any customers because he liked making barrels. And I gave him some challenges and he gave me some challenges. Could be like went to a trip to Spain together and over a few beers in an airport in Paris, started discussing that when you have staves outside for 2-3 years, the top layer must give totally different flavors on the cask than the middle part and the bottom layer because you get more of the sunlight, the rain and wind, everything. Later, I got a shipment of Swedish oak barrels from this cooper. And a few weeks later, he said, some of the casks has been from this wood in Sweden, the forest in Sweden. Some from this forest in Sweden. Some of the cask is top layer, some mid layer, and some bottom layer on the pallets. It's your job to pick up the different forests and top, middle, and bottom layer. And I tried to explain about we filled some with unpeated, some with peated spirit, some with new mix spirit, some with prematured bourbon matured whiskey. Yeah, it's just going to be harder. So I had a lot of those challenges. And one challenge he got from us was to make a square-shaped box cask. At the time, we had the name Box Distillery. And he made one square-shaped, and afterwards he said, I believe I can make it even more square-shaped. So placed an order for 100 more square-shaped casks, but he got 5 years to produce them. And I show picture for Spanish coopers, picture of this square-shaped cask, and they say it's not possible, but it is.
Whenever something like this comes up, I immediately think of Dr. Pat Heist over at Wilderness Trail. It was one of my first interviews, and he has been wanting to do what he called casket strength for him because he's a big like metal fan and got the great beard to go with it. But he wasn't able to do a cask-shaped cask because it wouldn't be watertight. It would leak too much. So I'm curious though if he were introduced to these squared casks, if he could do something with it a little more. So I'll have to reach out and see if he's seen these. So as I said earlier, the site and really as far back as I can see on the site, and that's including a web archive of links. You have incredible detail for what happens with every release. The years are measured as I think you said earlier to the 100th point in the decimals. The casks are laid out, not only what the casks are, but if they were resized, what they were before, how long they've been seasoned, everything you could ask for, really, as a whiskey nerd. I was curious from the perspective of someone putting that information out there. When you started, it wasn't common for people to do that. Hell, it's still not common for people to put that level of detail out. But did you feel like this was like your audience at Box and High Coast was whiskey people who wanted that kind of information, or was it more for you to just to say, we have it, let's share it?
Well, I know if you sell a whiskey for 1,000 customers, there may be 2 of them that are interested in those facts. But I'm looking back to myself, I was one of those 2 early. I was seeking for information on everything. So it's optional. You don't need to read everything, but if you're interested, you can read. So we are very transparent in everything we do. And we also educate other distillers' personnel at the distillery. And we have no secrets at all. You can take photographs of the logbooks and whatever. If anyone tries to copy our style and making really good whiskey, you're welcome. So if we're gonna put the Swedish name out on the big market, making people to drink Swedish whiskey and talk about Swedish whiskey, it's not enough that 1 or 2 producers in Sweden making good whiskey. Then they're talking about those 2 distilleries. So my goal is to help everyone to make as good whiskey as possible. So we have a whiskey academy have since early 2011. So I take 4 students for a week and teach them as much as possible about whiskey. Some are just whiskey enthusiasts, some are in the business, and some are just started a new distillery or about to start a new distillery. Most of the pupils I have is from Sweden, but some from Norway as well. So we like to help others. And if they like a product and they see what type of yeast and barley, whatever they're using, type of casks, maturation times, filling strength, whatever, be our guest.
Huge fan of the pay it forward mentality. And you answered one of my questions, which was going to be, the balance between how many, let's say, Swedish students you're getting versus broader Nordic and beyond. So what do you feel your reception and support has been among, let's say, in Sweden and in the broader region?
If been support, well, we have good support both in Sweden and by other producers and restaurants and consumers, of course. But also if you travel around in Scotland and you're saying to someone that you're from Sweden, often they mention the High Coast brand, thumbs up. So we have a good reputation and a lot of friends out there. And our big selling product, Berry is mountain in English. It's the most sold Swedish whiskey in the world.
Love it. And we're fortunate you are available in the U.S. Got LHK Importers and Park Street as the distributors, so pretty sure I know someone at LHK. So we'll reach out and see if we can get some of those more recent releases. Like I said, these have been excellent to try, but obviously you have come a long way since then as well.
Yeah, those mentioned, they're about 3, maybe 4 years old compared to the 15-year-old I released this spring. So our core range whiskey today, 4 different sizes, actually 5. They're normally between 8 and 9 years old. But the specialities we do is, we say, between 11 and 15 years old. They will be older in the future, of course.
I saw that 15-year-old, that was just in May, just came out. So pretty new, obviously limited because it was right at the beginning of your run. What did I've looked at the tasting notes, but I wanted to ask you, what did the profile of your whiskey look like after 15 years?
Well, it depends. For the first month, as I said, from the beginning until mid-May in 2011, we filled every cask at distillation strength. So the unpeated recipe should be around 72%. The peated recipe should be around 68%. And those higher ABVs, they will extract a bit more dry, spicier flavors from the oak. And the total maturation time is longer to reach the same maturation level. So the whiskey, the cask that we filled at 60% a year later is much, much, much further in maturation than those. So what I did with some of those earlier barrels was to add water, because Angels had taken some of the volume. So we fill up the barrels, and those were diluted to 54%, I believe. And then you extract a bit more sweeter flavors from the oak. You get more mouthfeel as well on the whiskey.
And I'm sorry, I should have looked this up, but the 15-year-old, was this kept in the same casks over the course of the 15, or was it transferred to different casks?
It was same barrels, but we did add some water some years before bottling.
Gotcha. Not a lot of people do that. In other words, usually you might consolidate barrels after a period of time, but not a lot adding water, which is, it's fully legal it's more just seems like not a common practice to do. Is it just a sense of, do you think people just kind of are like, once it's in the barrel, you just got to let it go however it's going to go? Rather than, it sounded like you were willing to say, okay, maybe adding a little water here would make a difference since we're still aging it another few years. Do you think there's just a hesitation to play around with adding something mid-maturation?
Depending on how your warehouse look, see some wrecked warehouse, it's not easy to get out just 1 or 2 barrels because you need to remove like 28 other barrels before getting to those. We have a different type of maturation of the warehouse, so you can get any cask in any place in our warehouse without removing anything else. So for us, it's a bit easier to take down a few barrels and do something with them. But adding water is not a common thing. It's more like if you have maybe 3 barrels and they're really old, you might re-rack all of the remaining whiskey in just 1 barrel instead. But otherwise, you just take what's left in the barrel and vat them all together.
Well, you have answered almost all of my questions here. I'm sure there are things that I have missed to go even further into the details here, but to close us out, I would love to get your perspective on the legacy questions. So what you want High Coast's legacy to be and what you want your legacy to be.
My priority has been having fun and trying to make as good whiskey as possible, in my opinion. Then I hope that other consumers also like what we make. And I really hope that I'm not going to live forever. And I really hope that those who take over after me will continue to do good things and have fun, because having fun at work is really, really important. But I'm a bit more satisfied. The first years I couldn't travel because I couldn't leave the distillery. Nowadays I have a lot of competent co-workers, some that can manage production, everything. I could be away for a couple of weeks and I don't need to worry about what happens at work. So they will manage marvelous without me in the future. But I guess I might be remembered one of those who made Box and High Coast whiskey.
And then High Coast has its own legacy to continue of both putting out high quality Swedish whiskeys, but also one that is still, after 16 years of production, still has new things up its sleeve, new experiments to try. And how many places are you going to be able to try Swedish oak, which was a wonderful taste? So
we're selling Swedish oak mature whiskey abroad. We have most of the whiskey we're selling is, of course, in Sweden. Before the pandemic, about half of the whiskey was sold on export. During the pandemic, the COVID, the export almost was like 0. But we sold a lot more in Sweden because the Swedes couldn't travel abroad, so they had to buy all the alcohol in Sweden. We've been trying to work it up, but we're not back to 50% on export end. And the biggest market has been in Asia. So China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan. And the market in Europe is mainly Germany, France, United Kingdom, and we also have some in the Nordic countries. We currently don't have an importer in the United States, but we're sold in the United States and Canada.
So looking forward to it.
So
yes, it genuinely is some of the best under the radar, at least in the US. Some of the best distilleries I have found and most interesting ones have been found randomly on an auction site over the years. And I saw you guys on there. I picked up 5 bottles. So what does that say about me? It's good things.
Well, I have to take a visit to Sweden, so I'll let you try a lot more.
I plan on it. All right, Roger. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hang on for me just a minute after I end the recording, and then I'll let you get back to the end of your vacation. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been another episode of the Whisky Ring Podcast. Please like, rate, and subscribe wherever you are. Keep those 5-star ratings going on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And there'll be links in the show notes to where you can find High Coast Distillery whiskey. And I'll see you all next week.